This is the first interview of our first edition of Other Sci-Fi Magazine. Our novelist, William Hayashi, hails from Chicago, Illinois. Tell us a little about yourself.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I feel privileged to be the inaugural online interview. And then, of course, you give me such an open-ended entree there with describe myself. I would say that at least creatively, I'm a screenwriter, and I got pretty lucky right out of the box and won an international award for my first script, winning the 48-hour film project best script, I guess, award for Chicago, Illinois for 2000. When was that? 2009. But going back to the novels, I wrote Discovery, which is the first in a trilogy. And this trilogy is basically, I've called it the Darkside Universe, because there's 7 total volumes in this universe. And Discovery I wrote in 2001 and finally got it published, self-published in 2009. And within a matter of, I think, a week or so, I should have the second installment of the trilogy, Conception, available for sale online at Amazon and a couple other outlets. So that's basically where the creative things are happening. I've also done a couple more screenplays. I was just invited to do some work with for a possible pilot for Showtime, and it appears that more and more people are at least getting to know my writing a bit better, and my name seems to be getting out there a little bit.
All right. Well, I want to back up and ask you how come this young black man from Chicago is named Hayashi?
Well, what I did was I was very careful to select my parents and to make sure that being born as far back as I was, that I would have an interesting biracial hook to build some buzz. But actually, all of that aside, my dad's Japanese. He's a West Coaster, and my mom's black. And well, they were both, and they met, believe it or not, at a bastion of liberal education, the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I guess fell in love, got married, and made the deliberate decision, where do we raise biracial children, and they settled in the University of Chicago neighborhood in Chicago. Actually, it's the same neighborhood Barack Obama lives in when he's not at the White House. And I grew up in what is probably one of the more unique neighborhoods in the country in terms of racial makeup, in terms of class, in terms of, it's almost like, I don't know, if I was going to be funny about it, I would call, Hyde Park like an intellectual ghetto, because everybody there, it's at least when I was growing up there, test scores were great, very bright people, all kinds of people attracted to the neighborhood. I had the good fortune to live across the street from where Dick Gregory, black activist Dick Gregory, lives. Muhammad Ali used to illegally park in our parking lot when he would go visit Dick Gregory, and we'd hang around his car until he came out and made him drive us to Little League. It was a pretty interesting neighborhood. As a matter of fact, Muhammad Ali came to my senior prom. I'm not sure what he was doing there. Yeah, we were at the Hyatt Hotel out by the airport, O'Hare Airport, and everybody was just partying down, and then all of a sudden there's Muhammad Ali there. I got to shake his hand, and I just couldn't believe how big his hand was. It was just unbelievable. And, of course, that was years after he had driven, the bunch of us to Little League a handful of times. So, of course, he didn't know anybody, or maybe he did know somebody. I'm not sure. Mm-hmm. So I attended, public school. I have the finest 6th grade education a person could get from Chicago Public Schools. Mm-hmm. And, I had a fairly, I don't want to call it unremarkable, but I didn't have, a tumultuous upbringing. I wasn't really enamored with school. I mean, I figured out the game to school, I guess, about my sophomore year in high school, and then went from getting C's and D's into getting, A's and B's, and because it was a game. It's just a game on, how to play that game and win. So growing up as a biracial child was not that big a deal. I mean, it was fairly unremarkable in Hyde Park. But, I was born before Barack Obama and Tiger Woods, and as far as I'm concerned, these are biracial come-latelys.
So, you come from a family, you're the eldest, correct?
My dad is actually the eldest. I'm the eldest of the kids, yes.
Of the children, yes. I presume eldest of the children. All right, and you have 2 siblings?
I have a younger brother and then a younger sister, and and my sister's the most conventional one. My brother's pretty eclectic. I don't see or talk to them very often at all. Sometimes years can go by between the time I talk to my brother.
You have a really lovely story that I just love, and that's your first job story, and you have to tell it.
Which story is that? How I got my first job, huh?
Yes, I love it.
I'm going to paraphrase because this is going to be sticking out in writing, but many years ago when I was in high school, I figured out how to do something, and I, honest to God, I don't want to be very specific about it, but I did.
Yeah, okay.
I figured out how to do something with the IBM mainframe that was downtown that the Board of Education used, and as a result of a very, very, very early case of hacking, and this was 1970, I got my first job in the IT field, and I'm still in the IT field now. That's predominantly how I make my money. So, I mean, we're looking at a 43-year kind of career in the information technologies business, but I was 15 when I got my first job, and I got it because of hacking into an IBM computer. And I know it's a great story, but I'm very uncomfortable, putting it out there someplace where someone can pick it apart and actually go back and see if the statute of limitations has expired. But I will say this, having done something for this long, having been in the information technologies business off and on, all that time, and then having my own consultancy since about 1982, I do feel like I am not the lead dog in a dog sled team. And by that I mean you could be covering the most ground out there. You could actually be in the fastest team out on the ice. But if you're not the lead dog, the scenery never changes. And that's a lot how I feel about having been doing computer consulting for this amount of time. It's still fun in some ways, when you get to solve a certain problem, if you get to, if you get a kind of a unique contract. But, people are still falling for viruses, and hardware is still being cheaply made overseas, and it doesn't last as long as it should. And you have people who are enamored with social networking and don't pay attention to the things that they should about protecting themselves and their children online. And all of those things are things that you have to be vigilant about on a daily basis, almost by a moment-to-moment basis, and people don't pay attention. And then that's when something happens, people get into difficulty, and then I have to come in and clean something up or eradicate an infection or something like that. That's kind of the boring part of this. And also, even when I wrote Discovery, that was like in 2001, I was looking to do something else. I wasn't foolish enough to think that, write a book, Oprah's going to all of a sudden discover it, and then you're going to make $1 million, and then you'll be done. It wasn't like that. But I thought about, let's think about, maybe diversifying your income. And it's funny because I remember the day that I started writing Discovery. It was like a crappy day in February in 2001. As a matter of fact, I believe it was February 6th. And the only reason why I know that is I saw a diagram that I did. But at the time, I was the board chair for Cabrini Green Youth and Family Services, which is a social service agency that operates in Chicago's fairly famous Cabrini Green neighborhood. For those of you who know where that is, that's where the TV show Good Times with J.J. Walker and was supposedly supposed to take place, in the projects. And I got the board position. It was a volunteer board because a friend of mine was doing some volunteer work for the organization, and he had some problems that he couldn't figure out and asked would I come and donate some time, and I came and donated some time. The director said, hey, would you like to join the board? And I figured, well, I could put in a couple of years to do that. And then 1 year, well, actually it was that winter, that going into that winter, there were board elections where people were being elected to various positions on the board. And I made the mistake of excusing myself and going to the restroom. And on the way back down the hall, people were congratulating me. Yeah, exactly. And I'm going, they're going, hey, congratulations. Okay. And when I got back to the room, everybody said, well, congratulations. While you were out, we just kept on going, and you've been elected board chair. So I served as board chair and did something that had never been done. We did a street festival in a park in the Cabrini Green neighborhood, where we had 2.5 days of music. We had events. We had just for the kids to play with, like that bouncy thing that you jump up and down on, a climbing wall. We actually did the first street festival that had ever been held in that neighborhood in the history of the Cabrini Green neighborhood.
Wow.
Yeah, and it was. We raised money. We raised about $10,000 for scholarships for kids to go to, for kids to go to school. And again, nobody had ever thought. We're talking about a fairly underserved neighborhood. I mean, it's completely different now. In the dozen years since we did that festival, almost all of the high rises, those public housing high rises, have been torn down and been replaced, because that is some of the most expensive real estate in the city because of its location. And when there's money on the line, all of a sudden things can change. But we did that, and then I guess it was also either very late in 2001 or early in 2002. The Illinois Department of Children and Family Services honored me. We did foster children placement and monitoring for them. And they honored me at that time for having brought best business practices to the social service agency model. So I was very proud of that.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and so that's kind of how. Anyway, I tell you that to tell you this. I was sitting there in that February in an office that they gave me because we were being reaccredited, so that we could continue to handle foster care cases and other services.
Right.
I was sitting there, and I was thinking it was a crappy day. It was, in the afternoon. And in Chicago, we have this really unique kind of snow that once it hits the ground, it immediately turns into slush. And it usually accumulates just enough to go over the edge of your shoes and get into your socks. So it was a crappy day like that. And I said to myself, William, no matter how many stories you have in your head and how much you think, you're a creative person, they don't exist until they appear on paper. Mm-hmm. And so I while I was sitting there, I was editing all of this reaccreditation stuff because I had fairly good writing skills, technical writing skills. But I thought about it, and so I pulled out my laptop and I did what I thought would be I did a flow chart, because I'm an old style programmer from the 70s. I did a flow chart of what I thought the plot would be, what a good plot would be. And the reason why I came up with the plot was because I actually came up with the ending of Discovery first. I said, oh, man, that's a great ending. So you should write a story that gets to that. And that's what I did. I started in that February and then wrote. And then November of the same year, I was sitting in my living room, which is where my computer was, and I was typing. And then all of a sudden I stopped, because I typed the last words in the book. And even while I was writing the book, I didn't really think I was going to finish it. I mean, I thought, well, maybe I'll finish this, and maybe this will turn out well. But I was kind of shocked, and I was in shock, because I kind of sat there, and I sat back, and I was like, oh my God, I wrote a book. And I stood up, and I was actually lightheaded. I was shocky from having written a book, and I went and got something to eat or drink or something, and I know it was a Friday. It was a Friday in November. So in 9 months, I had written a 330,000-word novel, which fortunately got cut down by about 100,000 words, because that would have been 750 pages, and And at the time, I had just gotten divorced, so I'm sure there was a lot of stuff in there that had no business being in a book. And that's basically how I wrote my first book. And people say, well, how did you do that? How did you do it so fast or even finish? Because I've got friends who have told me, oh, yeah, I've been working on a book. And I say, really? How long have you been working on it? Oh, I don't know, about 10 years or so. I say, well, are you close to being done? No, not really. And then they tell me why. And the reason why is, they only write when the mood hits them. And I went completely in the other direction. I got kind of regimented myself and treated it like a part-time job. So every night around 10 p.m., I would stop whatever I was doing. I would sit down at the computer, and I would either write or edit till about 1 or 2 in the morning. And by doing that, by working, 20, 30 hours a week on doing the book, I did get it done. So that's how I did what I did, got the book done. And it's set for, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to ask the order of operations. Did you start writing the book or finishing the book? Do you do those things? I guess you did that before you started thinking about screenwriting, or were you thinking about screenwriting at the time that you were writing the novel?
Oh, I didn't think about screenwriting. That was completely unexpected. That was 2009. I actually I was in a networking meeting. A friend of mine, I had done some work with some people who wanted to start a movie production company here in Chicago. And so, they asked me, they said, hey, we could use some help, from the business side to get this thing going. And, I helped organize the business and tried to get them going, but they didn't pay much attention to what I was talking about. And eventually they just went under. And I had met so many cool people in the Chicago filmmaking community that a bunch of them kept track, or I was helping out with a networking group, the Chicago Independent Artists Network, and that's facilitated by a friend of mine, Karen Pride. She's the public information officer for the Chicago Department of Aviation, so that's all things having to do with airports here in Chicago. But anyway, I was at a networking meeting, and two of the guys that I had known, that I had met through this organization, came to the networking meeting, and, at the time when we were all networking, they came up to me and they said, hey, there's this thing called the 48-Hour Film Project, and we need help with, we would like, help with writing a script. And I didn't know really what it was, but what it is it's a contest, and it's an international contest that goes from city to city to city. And what it is you have exactly 48 hours to write, produce, post-produce, and turn in a 3 to 7 minute movie, 4 to 7 minute movie, something like that. And you have exactly 48 hours and no more to do everything. And what they do is, in order to make sure nobody cheats, that the night, it starts on a Friday night. And then, of course, the city of Chicago knows the 48-Hour Film Project is that weekend, so nobody has to pull permits or anything. So if you see a bunch of people running around the city of Chicago shooting movies and stuff, you're kind of given a pass instead of having to go through all of the official rigmarole to get permits and things. So anyway, I go to the opening meeting where you pull your genre, and then they give you a bunch of elements that have to be in every single movie regardless of genre. And so we get back to our headquarters, and we had pulled our genre, and come to find out that the guy who was supposed to be the screenwriter was really an actor, and he didn't have any screenwriting experience at all. And, of course, I freaked out because I'm the only other person who's done any writing, and I wrote a novel. I didn't write. I had no idea how to write a script. And I did freak out. I had a mini nervous breakdown for about 45 minutes, and I started sweating like a pig. I was like under pressure because there's 50, 60, 70 people, however many people there were, and if you don't have a script, you have nothing. And I had never written a screenplay ever. Didn't even know how. I had to go to, as they say, the Google, and look up the format on how to write a script. So I've got all these tabs open, how to write a script, how to indent, what is this, what is that, and so I guess from about 8:30 Friday night till about 5 a.m. Saturday morning, I wrote a script for this 48-hour film project. And nobody gets any sleep. I was going to go home and get a couple hours worth of sleep, but then I had actually the only key to the place where we were going to film, the location, because the location was an office building where I did IT work, so I had keys for the basement and everything, and I quick made a call, made sure it was okay to use the location. And so the next morning, we're over there, and they're filming, and I'm kind of doing a little bit of script supervision, but not much. And they go through and, do the movie. We get the movie turned in on time and finally get to sleep. So about a week later, you have your little screening, and you get to screen. I think that weekend we had maybe, 35 or 40 teams in Chicago. And so they rent out a theater, and everybody gets to see all the movies, and they get voted on. And then there's the kind of like, it's not a banquet or anything like that, but it's a, we get together to it's like an award ceremony.
A mixer.
So we're sitting there. I'm sorry?
A mixer.
Yeah. And so we're sitting there, and, they're going through all of the nominations, and our movie, which, by the way, is up on YouTube, our movie was nominated, I think, in 3 categories, but also won some audience appreciation awards, too, which are not really official, but they're sort of semi-official. And so they go, and the nominees for Best Script are blah, 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 and then they said Fallout, Structured Productions, and we're all clapping because, we got nominated. Really cool. Mm-hmm. And then the winner is Structure Productions for Fallout. And we're all clapping, we're high-fiving. And somebody, one of the guys, Eugene, smacked me in the back of the head and said, hey, get up there, that's you. And I had won a trophy. So for my first script out of the box, even having had a nervous breakdown, I won for the Chicago Leg for the 2009 48-hour film project. So that was completely out of the blue. There was no planning there. There was no nothing there. And coincidentally enough, at that kind of mixer awards thing, a couple people came up to me and said, hey, can you come outside for a minute? We want to talk to you about something. And so I went outside, and across the street was like a Dunkin' Donuts, and we're standing in front of the Dunkin' Donuts, not even inside. And they're going, we need to submit something to NBC to try to get, I don't know what they were trying to get. And they said, we heard about your short story, Your 2 O'Clock is Here. Do you mind if we film that? And I said, well, no. And they said, would you help us out on that? And I said, sure. And so, like, in a very short amount of time, I had the first 2 things that I had ever written scripts for got made. And then subsequently, the first 4 scripts that I ever wrote actually got made into movies, and I think that's a pretty good record. I mean, that doesn't happen to everybody. So, to answer your question, script writing was something that just came to me out of the blue. I was kind of, baptism by fire kind of circumstance, but I did pretty well.
Now, you talk about how it is that I remember I've seen actually the flow chart that you produced in order to set out your plotting for Discovery.
Yeah. It's a little pain.
Yeah. It's intensive. And with that in mind, I mean, I don't know whether that is a quote unquote fun thing for you, or whether it's just the way that your mind works. In what is it you do in order to prepare for writing? In whatever way, it's screen or if it's a novel. What elements are the least enjoyable, the least fun, that you nonetheless have to persevere and persist through in order to get the work done?
Well, I'll tell you, the very first, when I sat down, you talk about the flow chart. I actually did that flow chart of the plot for Discovery, and that's been posted up a couple places if people want to look at that. But what I did was I actually custom built a computer to help me write. And the custom-built part was for the year 2001, I built a computer that actually had dual screens. And it was fairly fast because I wanted to be on the Internet and do research. And so having all of that screen real estate helped a lot because I could be typing into my word processor, and I'm old school. I use WordPerfect. A lot of people use Word, but I like the writing tools for WordPerfect a lot better. And I could be on the Internet doing research and all of that. And so I think the thing, now that I understand the process a little bit better, one of the things that I do when I get ready to jump into a book is I make sure that my tools are ready. I've got space on the computer. I got a fairly fast internet line. And then, I can't even talk about a process because the way I wrote Discovery was completely different than the way I wrote Conception just now. And I'm already actually writing. I'm in the writing phase of the final installment of the Darkside Trilogy, which is Confrontation. And the reason why, it took a long time for me to figure out how to do the plot for Conception, a very long time, because I wrote Discovery in 2001, and when I started writing Discovery, I didn't even know that I was going to be writing a trilogy. I thought I was going to write a one-off story. And as I wrote, I realized there was more to the story that I wanted to get out than could fit in one book. I mean, I was through there and I had a ton of words, but I couldn't conclude the story. So I thought about the whole arc and decided, okay, this is going to be a trilogy because there's 3 distinct books. There's 3 distinct stories to tell here. And then I did something stupid when I designed the cover for Discovery. On the front it says Volume 1 of the Darkside Trilogy. And so, that's kind of like screwing yourself because you can't not write 2 more books without people talking about you. So I did, but it's different. I mean, even now, the process that I'm going through in writing Confrontation, the 3rd one, is different than the process I went through for writing Conception and Discovery. And I also like one-word titles, too.
So do you find then that is it that as a writer you're evolving, or is it that the subject matter is evolving? Or is it a little bit of both?
Well, I think that's really valid about as a writer, am I evolving? I mean, when I wrote Discovery, I didn't know jack about writing a book. I just typed in a story, and I had to learn things while I was typing. I had to learn how to write dialogue because written dialogue is actually an artificial language because it is very seldom, I think, and I've looked at other people writing dialogue and how they write. I think writing dialogue is a separate language because if you wrote exactly the way people spoke, it would be unreadable. It's very hard to read that. People finish sentences over other people. You've got parallel thoughts going on. People talk in different rhythms, and you have people who finish other people's sentences. I mean, it's a very jumbled up environment, and I had to figure out how to write dialogue that sounded like people were actually saying it, but write it in a way that sounded real. But people don't normally speak the way that I see dialogue written in books. And some people are much better at it than others. I think I managed to strike a pretty decent balance. But now, when we talk about the construction of a plot, in Discovery, I had 4 major subplots that I actually diagrammed out with that chart, that flow chart that I did. And even though I had 4 major subplots, I wrote word for word. So I wrote linearly through each chapter, and did not, like all of a sudden write, well, let's write a bunch of this and then kind of split it up among chapters. I wrote word for word. I'm doing the same thing now for Confrontation, but it feels like a different kind of construct. And Conception, the 2nd book, was very hard to write because for many years, I mean, I wrote Discovery in 2001, and Conception I wrote last year. I wrote Conception in about just under 6 months last year, and I think it came out to about 600 pages. But Conception's plot had to be constructed entirely differently because Conception covers a goodly amount of time, about 4 decades worth of time, and I didn't want to do anything cheesy like, all of a sudden at the head of a chapter and have it say, and then 20 years later, or anything like that. I wanted to write it in a way that would be intellectually stimulating and visually compelling. And I mean visual, like as you're reading it, you're not having to work so hard at trying to absorb the action or remember who's doing what to whom and who's who and things like that. And that was hard. So that took a decade, over a decade, for me to figure out how to construct that plot.
Mm-hmm. And now, with respect to Conception, then why is Conception different? Because it took longer for you to write Discovery.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to your other observation where, am I getting better? And I think as a writer, I'm getting better. I mean, the people who have read, who I employed as readers for Conception have said that it's a better written book. And I would hope so. I would hope that I would have learned some things or improved in my craft. I don't want to sound so highfalutin like I'm sitting here going, yes, I have craft. But I would have hoped that my writing would get better. I mean, when I read Discovery now, two things are still going on. One is I can't believe that those are my words because that's like a book, and somebody wrote a book. Apparently, I wrote a book. And I remember being up late at night writing a book, and I remember bugging the hell out of all of my friends, reading chapters to them over the phone. Thank God, that they didn't go completely passive-aggressive on me and didn't answer the phone when they saw my name come up on caller ID. But having said that, Discovery, I mean, I don't go back to it very often because it was the first one. And it was really hard to let go. When I was getting ready to send it up to the fulfillment house for formatting, they actually called me on a Monday and told me I had to have it in by 7 p.m. on Thursday of that week in order to make Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and what have you, all of the online venues by Christmas for 2009. So, I didn't get to edit it the way I wanted it to. So I've got a bunch of corrections, and when I can afford to, I'll go ahead and have those, have the galley reset. So that was quick, and it was new. With Conception, the story, even though it's kind of it's a story of 40 years worth of time, it dealt with a much smaller pool of characters and certainly less complicated and less convoluted subplots than Discovery. Discovery is kind of like, well, someone else said it's a cross between Michael Crichton's writing and Robert Ludlum's, which is really flattering. But the cool part of that for me is I wanted to write a story that was not predictable, that as you read it, you go, oh, I know what's going to happen next. Oh, yeah, sure, fine. Oh, we know what's going to happen now, I didn't want to write a story that people are going to look at and say, oh, well, yeah, okay, of course that's what happens. And, my own internal testament to that is how Discovery ends. The ending of Discovery was the beginning of my process of writing. When I discovered that ending, when I thought of that ending, I went and I wrote 330,000 words to get to the ending, which I guess is kind of a little, I don't know, maybe psychotic or something. But now I'm also more in tune with the whole story arc and the characters. The characters of Conception are they're the prime movers of the Darkside Universe. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's giving away too much. I mean, there's enough descriptions out there, but the Darkside Universe tells a story of what happens in this country, in the United States of America, when the country finds out, when they discover that African Americans have been secretly living on the backside of the moon since before Neil Armstrong got there. Okay, that's the premise. And I never have heard of another story that was that similar to it. I wrote it deliberately to discuss, or at least not to discuss, but to chronicle the situations of and the peculiarities of race in America, and which I find is it's kind of deliciously ironic because going back to what we discussed earlier, I'm a biracial person. I've got a Japanese last name, and here I've written a speculative fiction story about African Americans, and if you don't know anything about me, you're going, we got this Asian guy writing about these black folks, and so there's kind of a strange, expected, and now for me celebrated, because it is such an oddity, a celebrated dichotomy in how it got done, and the characters who are in Conception are the people who managed to pull off this miracle. This technological tour de force that Russia, the U.S., nobody else who has a space program is able to do. And so that was, creating those characters was fun because I had to imagine what kind of guys would these be in high school, because that's when they met. That's when the story begins. These guys know each other in high school. One or two of them know each other in grammar school. And the other thing that really drove me to write this was that these are people that I grew up with. And these are people who largely in American culture don't exist. And these are, your standard middle-class American blacks, okay? And I tell you they don't exist, and people go, well, of course they exist. I go, no, not so much, because let's go back to the last Cosby show where you had a black doctor who married a black lawyer who lived in a great home and had black children who had essentially what society considered were white problems, okay? And people objected, oh, that's not realistic. If you're going to have a black family, well, the meme is one of the parents has to be missing, or all of that nonsense. And I had a very middle class upbringing here in Chicago, but those people don't exist. Well, you got your Oprahs, you got your Michael Jordans, you got your Kobe Bryants, you got your Kanye Wests, or whoever the flavor of the month is. But these marketing constructs of black people are all that people talk about and all that people hear about, and the people I grew up with just don't exist. They don't exist in movies. They don't exist in books. And so every single person you read about in Conception and Confrontation, all of these people are people who could have lived on my block. I lived on a block of townhouses. It was a cooperative, and there were, I think, 36 units. And we had black, white, Asian, Jewish, Gentile, Pacific Rim. We had an English family. We had all of these people living in this one group of townhouses. And, that so-called racial divide back in the 60s and 70s, the high school I went to, Kenwood High School, which is now an academy. I don't know what the hell that means. Kenwood High School was one of the most studied high schools in America during the late 60s and early 70s because it did not experience the racial problems that seem to be prevalent in every other high school environment in the United States of America. And I'm telling you, they studied the hell out of us. There's psychologists all over the place. And it's funny because our school was the model for the television show, and I know I'm dating myself, but there's a TV show about a high school, and it was called Room 222.
I used to watch it.
Yeah, and that was based upon our high school. How cool is that?
Mm-hmm. Can't go on.
What was it? The guy's name? Was that Michael Constantine, who was the principal
or
one of the main teachers?
Yeah, and Karen Valentine was the cutesy lady teacher.
Yeah. Oh, and all these characters, all these teachers were modeled after Kenwood High School teachers. So that was cool. So anyway, that was one of the reasons why I wrote what I wrote, because I wanted to write about black people who don't exist in our culture. There's not an Oprah in there. There are professional people, there are blue collar people, there are people from the armed forces, families, people who work at Dow Chemicals, these kinds of things. And I also, when I started to write Discovery, I wanted to write a story that had never, ever, ever been done before. I had read Octavia Butler, I had read Samuel Delany, and other people who write science fiction who happen to be black. And this was well before the term Afrofuturism had been coined. And one of the things that I mean, obviously science fiction gives you kind of like a visual, an internal visual of, spaceships or in the future, things like that. I wanted to write a story that talked about exactly how things are in America now. And I wanted also to do without pointing fingers. I just wanted to write about the de facto situations that blacks, whites, American culture, all of us live with. And that was what I set out to do. I have my little kind of, I do fantasize about, what would happen if you did get on Letterman or the Daily Show with Jon Stewart, or even Colbert, because you're an author, which I think would be very cool. I mean, I'm not going to say that I don't look forward to something like that, because I do. But here's my joke for those of you who listen to this, and you'll know something you can actually watch if this ever happens. I'm going to have them ask me, well, William, you're half black, you're half Japanese. What was it that compelled you to make the people who emigrated to the moon African American? And I'll say, well, John or Dave, which makes the more compelling story? Which is the better story? If the guys who messed up the curve, all the Asians who messed up the curve in all your classes in high school and college, built a ship and went to the moon, or if your basketball team did it. And as racist as that is, that's America. That's Americana. That's the expectation. So I wanted to write a story that was contemporary, and that's what I did. For better or worse.
I guess one of the things that you talked about earlier, when you mentioned people like Ludlum and Crichton, and I wanted to ask, and then you mentioned Octavia Butler, Sam Delaney. Whose artistic work do you admire? I mean, not to say that you admire anyone's. I don't think that it's necessary that you do, but such that you do, admire anyone's work. Be it screenwriters, directors, novelists. Who is it that you find compelling, and what is it about their writing, the directing, producing that you find compelling?
Well, my dad was a fan of written science fiction. He had a subscription to Analog magazine, Analog Science Fiction, Science Fact. And every month, when it came, I would go ahead and let him read it first, but as soon as he was done, I would read it. And then he had, hundreds of books by all of the classics, Asimov, Heinlein, Poole, Frank Herbert, And so I grew up on that, and believe it or not, I actually started watching The Twilight Zone when I was 4 years old. I just found that out. But my bed, I guess maybe it was still a crib, I don't remember, was off the living room. And my parents would kind of leave the door open a crack, and I would watch those shows. I even watched Jack Parr. I remember watching Jack Parr. So anyway, I started reading Asimov and all of the classic sci-fi from those years, Campbell, Sprague, Le Guin, all of these. And then I think during my 7th, 8th grade, I also got my mom got Madeleine L'Engle's series of A Wrinkle in Time, and the other 2 or 3 books in that series. So those are the people that I think I admire, because what they did was they opened up my mind to the possibilities. At that early age, up until I never thought I'd be a writer, but I appreciated it. I liked the movies too. I watched The Twilight Zone. I watched the original Outer Limits. Obviously, I was a fan of Star Trek, and even some of the stuff in you look at Maxwell Smart or Get Smart and Mission Impossible. Some of those devices bordered on the science fiction. So I was kind of nerdy in that respect. So when you talk about the classics, I like the classic authors.
Mm-hmm.
I like the creation of an entire universe. The Foundation series was great for that. Asimov's Robot series, and then Frank Herbert. That was science fiction with politics and intrigue. That was great. One of my first books that I really liked was a book of Herbert Bloch cartoons, Herb Bloch, and he did political cartooning, and I loved that. Charles Adams. I had a couple books very early with Charles Adams cartoons, and all of these things, they all spoke to me, and I really liked them. And in college I took a couple science fiction writing classes, but I only wrote to do assignments, to complete assignments. I had no expectation of being a writer. Some people get in those classes because they want to be a sci-fi writer. I took those classes, first of all, because they were easy A's, because I loved reading. I loved doing the reading, and it was easy for me to navigate those classes and get good grades. That's also why I took women's studies classes, too, but that's another story. Seriously, the writing part, never, ever thought about it. Never gave it a thought.
But do you think, I mean, even at this juncture, coming along at the time that you did, a child basically in the 60s, that the space race is right there playing out in front of you. Do you think that had an effect on your interest, as well as reading like analog with your dad's interest in it? Do you think being a child of that period kind of planted a seed with respect to this science fiction, especially with respect to this particular trilogy?
Oh man, well, I was very interested in that sort of thing. I mean, back then, I can think of two magazines where I actually went and got a subscription to them. One was Popular Science, because they had the science of the space program. One of my favorite issues of Popular Science was when Walt Disney decided, instead of putting Epcot Center near Wisconsin Dells in the Baraboo area, he decided to go ahead and convert, some swampland in Florida into Disney World and Epcot. Mm-hmm. And one of my favorite articles in Popular Science was how they were building that. That they were building, this whole underground city underneath Disney World and Epcot to manage the theme parks upstairs. The space program was pretty cool. I made models of the Mercury rockets, but I really loved the Saturn V.
Wow.
The Saturn V was powerful. Yeah, and I cut school in let's see. I guess it was maybe 1969, 1968, 1969. Yeah. And I cut school to go and see I think it was 68, because I was in 8th grade. I think it was in 8th grade. And I went downtown. I cut school to go see 2001: A Space Odyssey. So yeah, I did have a bug for science, and I'm sure a bug for science fiction. But it was, never, again, I just want to reiterate, I never gave the thought of writing any kind of credence at all.
Wow. Even though now, as you talk about it, when moving forward through time, to me it seems like it's almost a straight path.
Yeah, I mean, it probably is. But, but in 2001, I was 40, what was I? I was 46 years, no, 41 years, when was I born? 46 years old.
Where was I born?
Well, I don't keep track of that, because, now when, at this point I have fewer years ahead of me than I have behind me, and I don't need to be reminded of that. But to all of a sudden discover that you have a writing bug at that age, I think is kind of unusual.
Well, I think maybe you repressed it for so long, because it seems to me, as we talk about this, that it was there all along. You just, veered off into something that was tangential. It's like you say, your technical writing. That was tangential, but you were always a writer. So it seems, as we discussed this has always been in you, always been in your head.
Perhaps so, because, I did actually sit down and write a book. But there were so many other things that were of more interest to me. During the 70s, I was a club and radio disc jockey. I loved that, and I had so many other interests, mostly centered around women. I would be very disingenuous if I tried to gloss over that. But I also played, tennis at in school, high school, college, semi-pro, touring. I had all these other things. And I was still in love with computers. I mean, I loved computers. I loved learning about how to make them work, how to make them talk to each other. What was the possibility? What were the possibilities? I was hired to work on a National Institute of Health project, a grant, for the study of the reversibility of alcoholic brain damage. So we had these clinical patients who were alcoholics, and we would do brain scans of them, and then they would stop drinking, and then we would do extensive studies of their brain through back then magnetic resonance, MRI was brand new for looking at the soft tissue. I mean, we used CT scans, but MRI was even, we could find a little more data about the density of the brain tissue. And we found out that, when alcoholics stop drinking, their brain tissue, which usually sometimes can be quite dehydrated, will rehydrate, and some of the damage that's done to the tissue can be reversed, or at least you can be repatterned. You can kind of get back some of your faculties if you quit drinking and behave yourself. Or I don't know if that's the right thing. That's like a judgment. But so anyway, I was doing that and had a falling out with a neurosurgeon, and ended up having to go out and strike out on my own as a consultant. And that's kind of gave me the impetus to go and do these things on my own. My first computer that I owned, I think altogether cost about $4,800.
Wow.
I had to take out a loan to get that. But at the time, Digital Equipment Corporation was doing some pretty cool things with computers. And they also, locally here in the Chicago area, they fed me clients because I could do custom programming for them. So I did some work for Abbott Labs, and then my name started getting out there. And, one evening I had somebody from the FBI call me up and ask me some questions about something, so I helped them out with some things. So I had a bunch of different national clients, or Fortune 500 clients, and government clients, and that's kind of how I started out. So yeah, I've been kind of technologically slanted in my interests, and a lot of that technology, of course, is born of space technologies. I mean, look at all the medical advances we have because of space technologies. But I never looked at it like, oh, gee, why don't you be creative and write a story? I mean, seriously, that really came out of the blue. And I think one of the things that pushed me to write that was I was newly divorced in 2001, and I had some time on my hands, and that was a good way to fill up the days and the nights.
In your life, do you have any, personal heroes?
Well, my existence along those lines is fairly insular. There are people I admire. I mean, I admire people who put themselves out there and put themselves at risk. I mean, I can't imagine what it was like being, a Martin Luther King Jr.
Mm-hmm.
But to have the presence of mind and the wherewithal to give a I have a dream speech, and to think about the gestalt of that, the entire thing. Look at the whole thing revolving around that. The right time, the right place, some words that are so compelling. I mean, I think that the I have a dream speech is probably one of the most compelling speeches ever given in history.
Mm-hmm.
There will be people who will argue it, but I mean, as I sit down and I think about, he gave that speech, and he gave that speech under extraordinary circumstances, and essentially, he was killed for his beliefs, and knew that was likely.
Yeah.
So somebody like that, I admire him. I admire our current president, Barack Obama, because he knew the kinds of crap he was going to have to deal with to be president. When he gave the speech at the 2004 Democratic National Convention, that was one of the few speeches that I watched live. And I told the people I was sitting with, I was at a restaurant, I said, that's our next president. And they looked at me like I had lost my mind. They did. They looked at me like, well, are you out of your mind? You know, what? And I said, that's our next president. I said, I don't know how it's going to happen. I have no idea how it's going to happen. And then, you know, I watched, obviously, when he was sworn in, and then, you know, I was terrified when he and his wife, Michelle, got out of the limo and started walking down the street.
Yeah. That's fantastic, wasn't it?
I said, oh my God, you know, just please don't let anything. And I'm sure the guy was probably had Kevlar underwear on, but still,
yeah.
You know, I admire the fact that he did this, knowing the kind of crap he was going to put up with, and knowing. I mean, look what has happened. It only took his election, the election of a half-black American, you know, a half-black a person, that our president, you know, if you just want to call him a black man, our president got elected, okay, as a black man, and he's in the White House. And not only is he in the White House, he got re-elected. So as much all of those racist sons of bitches want to be upset about it, what he did was he proved that he is better. He is better than the white people who he ran against. And that's driving a sizable portion of this country crazy. They deserve to be driven crazy. And all of these things, all of this anger, and I'm pretty angry. I found that out about myself. I have a lot of inner rage. And you know, I know that it's there. It doesn't really bother me. I don't get in fights. I don't, you know, go out and shoot people or anything like that. But the Japanese half of my family, my father's family, lost everything, you know, and got locked up in the concentration camps in Utah during World War II because they were San Francisco area Asians. They were Japanese, and they got locked up. You know, they got their homes taken. They, you know, and so, and that seemed to be okay with everybody. You know, nobody seemed to be bothered by that. People forget about that.
Yeah, also, I think that is a very provocative story. That, you know, the first time I've heard you say that, tell it. I mean, it was shocking to me. I mean, this is a part of a past that, you know, we all know exists. I know people who are Japanese, who are from the West Coast. They've never talked about that. You know, I mean, frankly, because some of them are younger. So, you know, they are, I guess, another generation removed. But still, I mean, it is a horror. It's a horrible mark on our country's history. To me, it is amazing that, you know, we don't talk about that more. And I think, you know, maybe African Americans have the ability to, you know, more like, you know, the squeaky wheel, you know, getting oil, more verbal, more vocal. But that thing, you know, German Americans, Italian Americans, and Japanese Americans who were placed in internment camps in this country. I mean, what just a travesty. What a travesty.
I mean, it wasn't as bad for Europeans. It wasn't as bad because, remember, Europeans come to this country and they can assimilate. They're white. They can fill in. You know, they may look a little different, but not that different. Okay? Mm-hmm. But, you know, and then the other thing, you know, let's take a look at what this country has done. Can you imagine this country, even during World War II, and I know that the Germans had already surrendered, but atomic weapons have only been used against yellow people in this world. And that you know, I have a lot of anger about that too. And people go, well, yeah, but it was World War II, blah, blah. You know, everybody's got an excuse for it.
Yeah, but the Germans were.
No, of course not. Or Italy, or even, you know, you were scared to do it to Stalin because basically he was helping us out at the time. But, you know, and then, you know, I as a matter of fact, you know, and then on the black side, my grandfather got run out of Oklahoma, I believe it was, because he and his brother Wendell were cattle guys, and they were doing, they were actually better cattle guys than the white cattle guys. And so, the story that I was told was they were threatened with being lynched unless they left the territory. So, that would be like Bank of America going after Citibank because they're more popular or something like. I mean, I guess the analogy just fails me. So, and so when I started writing, when I thought about the story arc for Discovery, I wanted to tell a story that just illustrated what's going on in America and my views about the race issue. And I mean, that was the impetus. And the other thing was, and there was a little bit of ego involved, I wanted to write the biggest story about race in America that has ever been written. And I wanted to do it in a context that, though it was speculative fiction, it dealt with today. You have Octavia Butler, most specifically, she writes about issues of sociology and race, but they're detached from today because they're written about in the future or in other cultures. I wanted to take it on head on, but not in a way that was accusatory and not in a way that sounded like I was proselytizing or preaching. I wanted to tell a great story and base it on what I really believed would happen. And what would happen if America discovered that, a colony of 2,000 black people had technology that this country has never seen before, that probably will never see. And it was in control by black folks who were not inclined to share.
Yeah. And that's, I think, when in Discovery, so lovely about the story Discovery and moving into Conception, that the great premise, of this is that just because you have it, that of course you're going to share it, but then you have a group of people that said, no, we don't want to do that. And what is the reaction to that? And I thought it was, very interesting that you had someone who did a review of the book. I presume it was an Anglo male who had done the review of Discovery and said, oh, this is just like, I thought it was a comedy or something. So because, of course, black people doing things that were scientific, I guess, is, a comedy, that they would leave this country and leave this place to go somewhere else and then not share. I mean, we should be glad to be here, and suffer indignities or not be able to just to work to the edge of our potential, just to stop because no one wants to let you go any further and that they can't do that. The glass ceiling does exist. And if you had an opportunity to leave this place and to really push yourself to the extent of your knowledge, the extent of the capability, would you do it? If this one impediment, this thing that's like the gorilla in the room, if you could remove that impediment, how far could you go?
Well, yeah, the review you're talking about, the guy said it was like a Saturday Night Live sketch because he just couldn't imagine any circumstance that where black folks would be so disenchanted with living in America that they would leave and go to the moon and leave their world behind, leave their people behind, leave their families behind. And it's pretty funny. I've asked people who have read the book and haven't read the book, especially black folks, my friends. I said, I gave them a premise. If you could go live in a technological world that would allow you to travel around the solar system, at will, and your lifespan was twice as long as it is now, and that there were technological marvels that you can't even guess about. But the only caveat was that you had to leave everything behind. You couldn't tell anybody where you were going, and you could never come back. And every single one of them said yes, except for one thing. The ones who said, well, no, I would have to turn it down, the only reason why they turned it down was because they didn't want to leave their families.
When you wrote it, and I know that you wrote it, you were Mr. Flowchart, it's for Discovery. But when you wrote it, when you prepared the plot, were you aware of the visceral appeal that the story was going to have, and that it does have.
No, I really wasn't, and I didn't know that it was a good story for a while. My friends who read it said it was a great story. The people, my readers who went through it said it's a great story. It's well done. And when you hear that from your friends, I figure I had to take that with a grain of salt, because nobody wants to hurt their friend and tell them, oh, you wrote something terrible. And it went on, it was available from Amazon and Ex Libris, a couple, Barnes & Noble, in December for the Christmas season for 2009. And it wasn't until, reviews started popping up, and it wasn't until July or August of 2010 that I realized that the story resonated with people, and that people liked the story, and they liked the characters, and that the premise was something that had not been done before, at least not executed the way I executed it. So that was pleasantly unexpected. I mean, to answer your question, no, I didn't know at the beginning. I thought it was an unusual story. And I thought that the very ending was clever, which appealed to me. The irony of that ending appealed to me. But no, I didn't know until much, much later that I actually had pulled it off well. And then, I'm gratified to hear from readers, from you, from the editors that I had helping me with Conception, that they believe wholeheartedly that Conception is a much, much better book than Discovery. And I think there's two reasons for that. One is we're meeting some people that the readers get invested in. We're reading about the people who managed to pull off this technological miracle, this tour de force. And I like to develop my characters sufficiently enough that people can kind of actually feel them. I like to make three-dimensional characters. That's real important to me. So that I'm looking forward to. I mean, it'll actually be available for sale very, very shortly. I mean, within 1 or 2 weeks, maybe 2 or 3 weeks. So that's. I'm anxious to see how people read this story, because the story, like I said, it's completely different. It's constructed different. The physical construction of the plot is different. It's executed in a different manner, and so I wonder if if that's going to be off-putting to people who go, oh, this isn't like the other one. But they're two entirely different books, and I don't mean like. Of course it is idiot. They're two books, but I mean they're two entirely different ways of
communicating the story.
Telling the story. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. Telling the story. So I'm going to have to wait and see how that plays out. The third book is, I think if I had to characterize Confrontation, it's probably, going to be more like Discovery than Conception, but a lot of the familiar players are going to be there. So Confrontation is going to be a fun book to write. I already have the ending in mind. I'm trying to get there without hurrying, because I can't stand it when I read a book and it looks like, oh, well, somebody had the ending in mind and they wanted to just hurry up and get there and be done with it. I like to pace things out a little more slowly than that. But I'm really looking forward to hearing from people about what they think about Conception, because Conception is a big deal. And as I mentioned at the beginning, this is a universe that is going to have 7 volumes. There's going to be 2 trilogies, 2 distinct trilogies, and then a 7th volume that winds up the whole series. And I'm really looking forward to finishing this trilogy and going on to the next one, because I'm excited, because I know where it's going. I'm very excited. I'm excited about people getting to see Conception. Conception took a little while to get done. It took longer to get done than I expected. It was a little more expensive to do in terms of actually getting the book laid out and things like that. So things didn't move as fast as I wanted them to. But now that I am at the point where that's done, I'm really excited about seeing how people like it. It's funny when I tell people I have the elevator pitch down, and that's the 30-second description that you tell people to try to sell them. And my elevator pitch is discovery and conception tell the story of what happens in America when they find out that African Americans have been secretly living on the backside of the moon for over 40 years, since before Neil Armstrong got there. And I'll be very honest with you, and I don't want to sound like I'm putting anybody down, but there are some people who look at me and go, "Is this a true story?" So I don't know how to take that. To be honest with you. But I will tell you this. If by the 7th volume everything goes the way I want it to go, while I'm on the promo tour for the 7th volume, I'm going to disappear in the middle of the tour and go on home and head out into outer space to live with these folks.
Yeah, okay. We'll see. We'll see. We'll be watching you, based on your background, where you are at this juncture. What advice would you give to anyone who believes that they want to branch out into screenwriting or they want to strike out on their first novel? What should they be doing to prepare themselves?
Well, I don't know if they need to prepare themselves. I've had people come to me and say, "Oh, could you help me write my life story?" And oh man, the stand-up comedian in me immediately wants to say, "Well, I don't understand why you're even going to go through that effort. You're boring the hell out of me already." Have a story to tell. And when you tell the story, it has to be a compelling story. What's going to be interesting about what you're going to write? And I think that's the first big hurdle, because a lot of people write, and I mean, I joined the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website a while ago, over a year ago, and the site has been very, very generous to me. And I enjoy participating in things that are done on that site. As a matter of fact, every Friday night they have a radio show where I get 2 hours every Friday to interview a black creative, someone who does content, novelist, comic book creator, artists, just all kinds of people. And finding all of these new, interesting people that I didn't know existed just a short time ago has been such a revelation. And the fact of the matter is, if you have a creative idea that you want to share with other people, and it's something that is revolutionary, or even not revolutionary, but like a new twist on an old idea, I think that's what makes it compelling. For me, I always tell people, you better have a damn good ending, because with both book and a movie, that's what people remember the most. That's the last thing they see or read before they close the book or walk out of the theater. And if you don't have a compelling ending and you didn't tell a good story, that's time that those people never get back. And I've left movie theaters, and I've also closed books and felt cheated. So make sure you have a great story to tell. And try to make sure that your ending is compelling enough to put somebody through that, make them spend their money, whatever you're going to do. It doesn't always have to be unexpected. I mean, look how well Titanic did, and I'm pretty sure most people who went into the theater knew what was going to happen at the end. The same thing with The Passion of the Christ. I was in movie lines when both of those movies came out, and, I would ask people when they were coming out of the theater, how was it? And then they'd start to tell me, and then before they could say anything, whoa, don't tell me the ending. Don't ruin it for me. So that's what I mean, if you have a story, tell it well. And the other thing that I'm finding is a lot of people don't do their due diligence in terms of editing and cleaning up their work. I'm kind of appalled that there, so many typos slip through in Discovery. But part of that was inexperience and also a a publication deadline that was just unavoidably short. There was nothing I could do about that. So one of the things that I will do is the proceeds from conception are going to go for me to redo. I've done all the corrections, and to get the corrections, have a new galley done of discovery and have that taken care of. But I'll tell you right now, people who write and don't have someone else edit their work, I think are selling themselves short, because the story may be great, but if there's all these things that pull people out of the story, that force people to suspend their disbelief, I think it makes for a poorer reading experience. So I think about that too. So those are the two things: have a great story to tell, but then tell it well. And the last part, of course, is, you may have a great story, but you've got to finish it. And that's where I tell people, treat it like a part-time job. I treat it like a part-time job. When I'm in full-on writing mode, every day I'm working on it. And, I can't remember very many days at all where I just bagged it. I had the flu there for a while and I couldn't concentrate, but otherwise I never just said, I don't feel like it today, because I believe that if you get into that habit, it won't get done. It just simply won't get done. And you're selling yourself short, because remember, that's a lot of effort. And writing a book is not an easy task. Writing a good book is an even harder task. And fortunately, we have self-publishing options that didn't exist a generation ago.
Exactly.
Which makes it much, much easier for you to get something published and not have to break through the gatekeepers of the big 5 or 6 publishers. The catch-22 in the publishing business is you can't get a publisher without an agent, but you can't get an agent unless you've already published, because no agent really wants to do some really big heavy lifting and try to get a person's name out there who isn't out there. I know where my difficulties lie. My first book, when it got started to be sent out, was, it was 750 pages, 330,000 words, and it was a first-time author who really didn't know what he was doing. Now things are a little bit different. For me to get a publisher, like HarperCollins or Tor or somebody like that to look at me, they're going to want to see what the third book is like, because I know one of the things they think about is, well, William has these black books with this advanced technology and they live in outer space. I wonder if he's going to have them come back to Earth and kill all the white people in America. And well, I'm just saying, they don't know. They don't know until they see the third book. And if that happens and they give me an advance or whatever, that's going to be a bad investment for them. They're going to go, we could have spent that money a little more wisely, because that's not a book and that's not a movie that Warner Brothers is going to want to make, because it's just not going to cut it. So, there's a lot to it. It's a very complex process. Getting published is very complex. You could do it easily, but getting published, getting publicity, getting your name out there, all of those are very difficult things to do, because the gatekeepers who manage the publishing industry are really into blockbusters. They're into repeat business. They're into low-hanging fruit, and it's tough to get a toehold in. But I think that if I'm getting the kinds of reviews that I've been getting for Discovery, and I get the same kinds of reviews for Conception, having done 2 books of a trilogy is a lot more compelling and shows that I'm a lot more serious than only having Discovery out there. So we'll see what happens.
Do you ever experience resistance or negativity from anyone when you indicated that you want to pursue a career in arts in general or writing in particular? And so how did you respond to it?
Well, I have people go, well, are you making good money off your books? And, at this point, no, not really. There's the realities of the economy. There's the realities of the economies of scale. Am I going to make twice as much money with 2 books or whatever? It's hard to say. And I'm fortunate that people have not really come to me and say, well, are you sure this is what you want to do? I got asked to help write a pilot for a TV show. And I found out that you can get paid up to $30,000 an episode. Well, that's some very compelling money. And I'm thinking very seriously about doing that. I'm not going to do that instead of writing novels because I have synopses for 7 total novels to do for an additional 5 novels. But, when you talk about being able to pay the bills, that's some pretty good bill-paying money.
Mm-hmm.
And that's another reality. People who write a book and think they're going to get rich, well, I can see it if you're a pop icon. Obviously, pop icons are going to get people to buy their books whether they're good books or not. And from what I've heard, most pop icons don't write their own books. Somebody else ghosts it for them. So that's kind of different. But as far as someone like me who is, who has settled on writing, something in speculative fiction, science fiction, and something that has kind of an overt racial theme, this, obviously, if I thought I was doing this to get rich, I was a fool. And I didn't do it to get rich. I did it to tell a story, and I did it to tell a story that hadn't been told before. No offense to other people who write speculative fiction, especially black folks who write speculative fiction, but I wanted my story to be a bigger story. I wanted it to talk about what it's like peripherally, what it's like being black in America today.
Mm-hmm.
And this is current. These are all current times in these books, and it's just an alternative history. So that was the thing. The big thing was I want to write a big story. I want to write a story bigger than any other science fiction story that had a racial theme, or at least had covered race that had never been done before. And it appears that I've done that.
So where do you envision your career 5 years from now?
Well, 5 years from now, I'll have the first trilogy out and maybe 1 or 2 volumes of the second trilogy. I have 2 feature films that I think I'll be able to get made. One of them is a comedic bank heist movie, and the other is a Christmas movie. A Christmas movie. The Christmas movie, if I'm to be entirely honest with people, is low-hanging fruit because if you do a decent Christmas movie and it's funny, you get residuals every single year because somebody on cable is going to run your damn movie. So that's fun. But the one that the comedic bank heist movie, I'm looking to try to hopefully get that done next year. So over the next 5 years, maybe another couple of books and at least 1 feature film. And then who knows how this whole television writing thing may go. I don't know. I'm not counting, eggs in a basket or anything like that. But I will say this, that having written Discovery and having the release of Conception right around the corner has opened some doors for me that didn't exist, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, certainly didn't exist before I wrote Discovery. So I think that if I can maintain the quality of my writing to the point where people are anxiously waiting for the next installment of, my Darkside Universe, I think that 5 years from now, I don't know if I'll be self-sustaining from a writing standpoint, but I would like to be close. I would like to be at the point where the sales of books are is actually paying most of my bills. And if I could write full time and not have to do IT work, not have to take another virus off somebody's computer, not have to de-porn one more laptop that has to go back to the IT department because you're getting a new one and you don't want them to know what you've been surfing. If I don't have to do that, excuse me, if I don't have to do any of that 5 years down the line, that's going to be heavenly. That's going to be great. I think that would be wonderful.
Over the past, You've made yourself available for book clubs to discuss your work with Discovery. Will you be doing the same thing with regard to conception?
Yeah, I will. I had a book club in New York read my book, and then I appeared with them via Skype. I'm fairly fun to have, around. I enjoy meeting people, to a certain extent. And yes, I would be available for that. And if anybody, after they read the book, I've got I have another interview coming up at the end of the month, another internet radio interview. So, again, things are slowly picking up steam, and I'm very gratified for that. And I don't take fans for granted. If I do find out someone is reading, or someone has purchased one of my books and is reading it, if I can get their address, I send them something. If they're here in Chicago, I'll meet them and sign their book. I think it's the least I can do for people who support me and support my art.
And also, if they want to meet you guys, two different things, where online, what websites do you frequent? How can people, if they want to try to engage you online, where's the best place to do that? And also physically, if somebody wants to meet you in person, where would be the places, in the next several months where they could meet you?
I don't have any appearances planned yet because the book Inception has not been released, and I haven't put together any pub for that or any, like a release party or anything like that. I think the best place to find me online and to find some pretty cool other writers is the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website. I'm there usually on a daily basis. I get some good input from people there. I like the creatives there. I had no idea there were that many people doing science fiction, black science fiction. So that's a good place to find me. And also, I think that what I'll probably do is there's an events calendar both on the author's page, my author's page on Amazon.com, and also there's an events calendar at the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website. So I think I'll use both of those to post any appearances that I may have in the local area. And obviously, if I get called out of town and somebody wants me to show up someplace else, I'll publicize those as well. So if I'm going to be in the Atlanta area or New York or Detroit or someplace like that, checking out the events calendar at blacksciencefiction.com, or go ahead and look at my author page at Amazon.com. Both of those, I will make a very concerted effort to keep them up to date on who, what, when, where, and how.
And with respect to your series, are you going to develop a Facebook site, any other social networking platform for your series, or a website for the series that people can check, for updates, for interactions, and things like that?
Yeah, I have a billboard site that has some information, and it's the DarksideTrilogy.com, www.thedarksidetrilogy.com. A friend of mine put it up. I haven't used it very much, but I think the necessities of marketing are going to call for that. As far as social networking, I don't do very much social networking now. I don't have a Facebook page myself. Part of that is, kind of like I got enough friends, I don't need any more, which is not exactly right, but it takes a decent amount of time to keep up with things like that. So I think that when I make I get to the point where I'm going to make a further commitment in marketing my writing and my films, that obviously there'll be a necessity for more interaction there. So yeah, eventually.
I guess my last question is, what advice would you give to individuals who have taken off in technical or other professional career fields, who then learn that they have a desire to pursue the arts?
You know what? I think there's nothing wrong with taking some classes or, doing some seminars in writing, because it's not easy. I'm self-taught. And I don't say that to say anything other than I take complete credit for whatever screw-ups I've done in terms of writing. I can't blame that on a teacher. I can't blame that on, a mentor. When I first started out writing Discovery, I didn't know what the hell I was doing, in writing a book. And there are things that you need to do. I did read books on how to write. And I think some of the books, I don't recall the titles, but John Gardner, great American novelist, I read several books by him. And I don't want to blame him for any of the deficiencies in my writing, but they were inspiring, and they were concise, and they were very logical, and they made a lot of sense. And I think that I don't want to say but one can do a lot worse than at least reading about how to write. It's not a natural process, I don't think, and it's not a straightforward linear process. I think that my advice is, try to learn what the hell you're doing. As far as, kind of a nerdy techno geek like me, if that's who you are, and you're a gamer, I do first-person shooter kind of things. I don't know. I honestly don't know what kind of advice to give to people. Other than, if you're serious about it, then you have to treat it like a job. Treat it like a job, you're going to get done. If you don't treat it like a job, you're not going to get done, and you're wasting your time. And if you've got the inclination to waste your time, that's cool. But if you're serious, one of the things that people don't do, that I see time and time again, is they don't realize that being an author is a job. It's not only a job, but it's a profession, in that you have to not only write the book. Writing the book, I think, is maybe 25% of the entire process. But getting it published, getting it marketed, getting visibility, and getting people to buy your book, that's a lot of work. And social networking helps. You have to hone your elevator pitch. You have to think in terms of marketing. You have to think in terms of what's going to make a compelling book, what's going to make a compelling description. Like I say to some people, and I know it's cruel, but they go, I want to write a book. What's it going to be about? Well, it's going to be about me. And I go, well, you bore the hell out of me. So no, that's not going to work. Make sure you've got something to say, and then try to execute it well. I'm not the person to teach anybody how to write, but the other thing that I do at the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website is I will look at other people's work, and I'm perfectly willing, up to a point, to mentor anybody and at least tell them how I got where I got and what I think are some of the things that I might have to offer that may help them in their perspective. There's some people who can't write, and that's tough, because if somebody says, hey, could you read this and let me know what you think, I'm of two minds at the very onset. When somebody asks me that, I automatically think two things. One is, are they serious? Do they seriously want to, find out what I have to say? And two, what are they going to do? Are they going to take what I give them and at least discuss it with me? And I will tell you right now, I'll be brutally honest with you. 95% of the people who have said, would you look at my stuff and tell me what you think, all they wanted was a cheerleader. They didn't want a critique. A lot of people are thin-skinned, and they're incapable of taking criticism. Two people gave me a critique about Discovery that I didn't exactly agree with, because I knew what I was doing when I was writing, and I did it deliberately. And they both said, well, the story starts off slow. And I understood why they said it, and I didn't want to argue the point with them. But I listened to what they said, and I reread, how Discovery started out. I said, yes, it does start off slow, but then I knew why I was doing it. I was developing three-dimensional characters, and I wanted, because there were so damn many characters in that book, I wanted people, as they read further in, to be able to know who the characters were when I switched from subplot to subplot, and not have to go, oh, wait a minute, who's this guy? Who is this? And that way they could become invested in the characters quickly enough, even though it started off slow, that they did not have to rack their brains to figure out who's who. So yeah, I listen to critique because I know that I am so far from perfect. But I will tell you, 95% of the people who have asked, hey, could you take a look at my stuff, they weren't interested in any kind of critique. And if you're that thin-skinned about your writing and you're not interested in people who may know more or may have an observation that you missed, you're not going to get very far. Or I don't think you're going to get very far. And you look at their work and it's crappy. When somebody wants me to read something, oh, hey, I just posted a new story at my website, and in the first paragraph there's 3 typos. That's not good, And, one person said, well, I never edit my stuff because I'm too busy trying to move on to the next thing. And I go, okay, fine. But I don't know if that actually answers your question. I mean, that's about the only thing I can think of, Do what you do well and have some pride in your work and put in some time and effort to make sure that it's polished.
For the moment, I guess that's about all we have until Conception is launched.
Yes, Conception should be out probably, hopefully, about the same time this magazine article comes out. I want to thank you for inviting me to be your inaugural guest interview.
I'm just really thrilled that, the second part of the series is on its way. I just think it's going to be a really good year.
Well, from your mouth to somebody's ear, because, I'm like most everybody else in a tight economy. I'm trying to keep the wolf at bay. I'm always anxious to hear, and not anxious in a bad way, but I'm always intrigued and anxious to hear what people thought of the stories I constructed, because I also learn from what they tell me. For those people who listen to this and want to keep track of what I'm doing, I will commit to posting up any travel or any appearances I will be doing for the Darkside Universe. And I invite people to drop into the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website, get hold of me there, and also I'll be posting up some of the earlier chapters for Confrontation a little bit down the road, so you can kind of see how the third installment is going to start out. And again, thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for sitting with us.
All right.